Welcome to the quick explanation of PNF. This is our next form of training method. It's in your exercise physiology booklet, the notes. I think it's from page 34. It's the bit after we just finished on the weight training. So PNF, you will be familiar with it because you did it in year 1 as part of your paper 1 material and a specialist training method, and it also appears on paper 2 as a training method as well. The aim of PNF, or proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation, is to increase flexibility and range of motion at a joint. You'll remember most of the time PNF is done or can be done passively. Passively means with a partner. So you can see the lady there lying on the floor has taken her leg to its range of motion at the hip, and she's got a partner helping her to get into that position. As she does so, she'll be feeling a stretch down those hamstrings. And she'll hold that position for probably about 30 seconds. After 30 seconds, she'll then push her leg forward against a resistance that's provided by a partner, and they'll hold that, creating an isometric contraction for about 5 to 7 seconds. So let's just go through. She takes the limb to its range of motion, holds it for about 30 seconds, then pushes against a partner's resistance, creating an isometric contraction for about 5 to 7 seconds. She'll then relax it, she'll release that tension in a muscle, and then her and her partner should be able to take that leg, that limb, further through its range of motion and stretch those hamstrings even further. As we go through this, please do make some notes. If you need to pause at any point, do make sure you've got lots of detail in there with your sporting examples and your sporting applications. Okay, so first things first, key facts about PNF. We know that if we get a short answer question or an extended question, we need to know what the facts of PNF are, especially if we're asked to explain them. So here we go. PNF uses something called the crack technique. So contract, relax, the agonists contract them again. So you'll get a mark for saying that PNF uses that crack technique. It's an advanced form of stretching, and this improves an athlete's range of motion. Process, I have just talked you through it, but I'll go through this again with you because you can look at the image on the side, a slightly different image to the one before. So with this one, with the process of PNF, you passively stretch the target muscle. So this guy that's lying on the floor, they're passively stretching their hamstrings with a partner for about 30 seconds. They will then push against a resistance created by the partner to generate an isometric contraction. And they'll do that for about 5 to 10 seconds before relaxing and then repeating that stretch again, so taking that limb back through its range of motion. In that subsequent stretch, when they take that limb back again, like I've just said, they should be able to take that target muscle further through that range of motion, and over time that's obviously going to build up flexibility. In terms of the benefits, obviously it's going to benefit anybody that uses or takes part in a sport or an activity that involves lots of flexibility or relies on flexibility. So if you look at high board divers, dancers, trampolinists, gymnasts, they all get scored more often than not on how good the movement looks, how tight the tuck is, have they managed to get into that advanced position. So an increased range of motion from PNF is going to really benefit those types of people, particularly when they're doing more advanced routines. It allows them to create more aesthetically pleasing shapes. So if you look at those high board divers, that lovely tight tuck that they've got, that increased flexibility at the trunk, their upper body, allows that more aesthetically pleasing pike move that they're creating. It can, however, also have benefits on other sports as well, because if you're more flexible, you're going to be able to be more efficient and effective when you technically execute your skills. So a swimmer, for example, needs good shoulder flexibility for those more efficient strokes if they were doing butterfly or front crawl or something like that. It also allows them to tuck tighter in a turn, giving them a faster turn and a faster time on their race. A sprinter who's got increased hip flexibility can get a lovely high knee lift and a more efficient technique, can be more powerful and accelerate down the track faster. A tennis player, so we can see on the image there, a lovely flexibility at the hip and the shoulder, allows you to stretch and return shots and avoid being called out. And a basketball player with increased shoulder flexibility, they'll be able to complete things like an effective layup shot. So don't skimp on those examples. Don't just do one or two. Make sure you've got plenty of examples. So any question, any sport that comes up, it'll help you to really think on the spot about how flexibility is going to have an impact on their performance. It's also going to benefit people like your rugby players and your football players, because if you can be more flexible and have increased range of motion at a joint, we're going to be able to probably prevent injuries. So if you think about particularly footballers, they're very prone to things like hamstring tears and strains. If they're more flexible, if they've got greater stretch in those hamstrings, they're less likely to get that injury and less likely to need to take time out of games and training. There are, however, some drawbacks that we need to think about. So because of the passive nature, because you're working with a partner, you've got to really trust that partner. They've got to be knowledgeable, they've got to be experienced. Otherwise, they take that limb too far through its range of motion, there's a risk of damage. Similarly, if you've not done a thorough warm-up beforehand, that can lead to an increased risk of injury. And actually, we're going to talk about this in a minute. In PNF, you'll remember this from year one, one of the reasons it works is that you're overriding one of the protective mechanisms of the body. You're overriding the stretch reflex. And in doing so, if you're not careful, you can damage and injure the muscle fibers. The other thing about PNF, it's really specialised, so it only focuses on flexibility. And yes, it's useful in swimming, but actually there might be other components of fitness that are deemed more important, such as anaerobic power in swimming sprints. So another form of training will probably be more beneficial. And the other thing with PNF, never use it as a warm-up activity. It really is a training session, a training method, but don't use it as a warm-up activity in games or events relying on speed and power, because if you do it straight before the activity, it can actually negatively affect performance because it reduces your speed and your power. And then the last little bit, just linked to year one and the neuromuscular system. There's two proprioceptors involved in PNF. I don't know whether you can remember what they are. It might be worth just having a think about them. And the two proprioceptors involved in PNF are muscle spindles or muscle spindle apparatus and Golgi tendon organs. The muscle spindles, both of them have a protective function. So the muscle spindles, if you stretch a muscle too far, the muscle spindles send a message to the brain to cause that muscle to immediately shorten, to protect it from being damaged and torn or pulled or whatever. And we call that the stretch reflex. So let me just go through it and get some notes down. So the muscle spindles detect how far and fast a muscle is being stretched. If there's too much stretch, they send a message to the brain sends a message back and produces a stretch reflex, and this is where that stretch muscle will immediately shorten. We'll get a concentric contraction. It's designed to be protective. Now in PNF, and we'll get some notes on this in a minute, we override that stretch reflex, we override that protective function, and we'll have a look at why in a sec. We've also got the Golgi tendon organs. Just have a think what you remember about those. So the Golgi tendon organs detect too much tension in a muscle. So they're located in the tendon where the muscle attaches to the bone. So if there's too much pull on that tension because the muscle's contracting too much, the Golgi tendon organs detect it, they send a message to the brain sends a message back for that muscle to relax. Okay, and again, we are using those Golgi tendons to our advantage in PNF. Let's have a quick look how. So in your class notes, I'm going to explain it to you, but I do want you in your own words to explain how the proprioceptors are involved in PNF. So listen to the explanation first of all, and then make a note of it in your own words. So we've already looked at what the muscle spindles do. They detect how far and how fast a muscle's being stretched. So on the image there, image one, when they take their limb to its range of motion, those hamstrings are absolutely pulling. And the muscle spindles are on high alert. They're sending a message to the brain to say that those muscle fibers are at the point of being overstretched. The brain at this point would usually send a message back to initiate or produce a stretch reflex to cause that muscle to shorten. But what happens in PNF is we override that mechanism because we take the limb to its range of motion, and before the stretch reflex has time to kick in, we then push against the resistance. So the muscle spindles no longer feel or think that that muscle's being stretched. Let's get some notes down and we'll have a bit more of a look at this. So for the muscle spindles, during PNF, the muscle spindles detect the stretch during that passive phase, but actually we then override the stretch reflex by initiating the isometric contraction by pushing against the resistance. And then the Golgi tendon organs, when we do that isometric contraction, the GTOs detect that tension in the muscle. They cause those muscle fibers to deeply relax. Remember, we only do the isometric contraction for about 5 to 10 seconds. So they cause those hamstrings to relax, which means that we can then take that limb even further through its range of motion. So the Golgi tendons detect the tension during that isometric contraction, and they cause that muscle to relax. It overrides the stretch reflex, and it's known as autogenic inhibition. It allows us to take the muscle further through its range of motion. Now, I don't know when I save this whether it'll let me keep the video clip on, but what I'll do is you can either look at the final slide and watch the video of them talking through a PNF stretch, or I'll attach it to your team's assignment.